Good morning, one and all. First of all, it is our pleasure to host a two-day conference on Deciphering China, Day 2, jointly organized by Institute of Contemporary Studies, Bangalore, Chennai Center for China Studies, and Press Institute of India. This is Balasubramaniam, Research Officer at C3S. On behalf of the organizers, we wish to extend a warm welcome and gratitude to all participant guest of honor delegates and representatives from abroad and within India. To begin day 2, I would like to invite Session Chair Sri Suresh Bushulu, Founder Director, Smart Transformations, to conduct the proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, everybody. And Bala, it is Bulusu, B-U-L-U-S-U. Today, I'm going to be moderating the session as a panel discussion with my friends and colleagues, Samir Tomre, Samir Aksekar, my ex-colleague from JP Morgan Chase, a blue-blooded cybersecurity professional, and he has done a lot of work in this area, and he's a technologist too. Ruchika Arora, a good friend and a blue-blooded cyber technologist, and she's a technologist in other sense also. Munjal Shroff, another good friend of mine, a technologist, and he's into graphic and gaming, and he has got a passion for cybersecurity, and four of us, we work together on a lot of cybersecurity engagements, from the assignment of work, which is in the form of sensitizing people to assessing situations for risk and remediations and audit. We can do all the 9 yards in the cybersecurity space. Today, we are going to be talking in terms of cybersecurity and more focusing on more like a curtain raiser to focus on what cybersecurity is all about. Well, some of you are very knowledgeable in this area, but we want to keep it in the form of a curtain raiser where we talk about a lot of areas in the cybersecurity space, and specifically the 4 or 5 questions which we have discussed amongst ourselves, which we will be connecting to this particular chapter of the program which you're talking about. Today, when we talk about cybersecurity, the first thing that comes into everybody's mind is the pace at which digitization is happening across the globe. Technology is definitely a tool which is helping us to build businesses in different forms, making companies global. It has ease of use, 24/7 availability, and all the other benefits which are there. But we should not forget the dangers lurking around technology, one of which is the cybersecurity area, the cyber risks which we are there. We will be talking about cybersecurity, which is a deep subject by itself. It becomes that much more complex when we add the advent of technologies. Today, when we talk about technology, we are at the cornerstone where technology has not turned as much or changed as much as it has done in the last decade or so. With advent of IoT, artificial intelligence, machine learning, business analytics, you talk about anything which is there, cybersecurity actually is a part of that. In this, we are going to be talking relatively about the areas that we are vulnerable at, the areas where we can talk of our strengths. We'll also look at opportunities which we have thrown at us, and then we will have people talking about examples which are there. So let's understand what is cybersecurity per se. If you have to define it, a bookish definition would be, it is the practice of defending our systems. Largely, our systems consist of computers, servers, mobile devices, smart devices, electronic systems, and so on. And most importantly, it is providing the transmission of data in a secure form. The data which is sent from point A to point B is secure and it is received there and so on. Now, this also applies to a variety of contexts, from business to individuals. Computing can be divided into a few categories. We can talk about network security, application level security. We can talk about information security. We can talk about our operations which are there in security, and it doesn't miss any domain. Whether you talk about retail, or you talk about healthcare, you talk about manufacturing, it is there everywhere, and therefore it will also apply to largely in the defense areas. In the armed forces, as I know, Mr. Heblikar said this many times when I met him, is we detect, we deter, we destroy whatever comes in the form of an attack to us. We only add 2 more facets to that. One is documentation, so that we have a knowledge repository, and we talk about sharing of practices, whether it's good or bad. So good practices we will start following, bad practices we'll have to avoid the pitfalls and so on. With that said, what I will do is I will invite Samir to talk about, first of all, what does cybersecurity mean to us at a national level? We are talking about people who are teenagers, homemakers, students, professionals, whatever, and businesses, whether it is small and medium business or enterprise business, and at a national level as a country. So Samir, what is cybersecurity at a national level?
Thank you, Suresh. So as Suresh defined, correct? So cybersecurity is all about protecting the integrity and security of our systems, and more so those which are connected to the internet. Now, again, cybersecurity applies to various domains, whether you say defense, civilian, financial, healthcare, across sectors, correct? Now, let's go into one sector, let's say civilian, just to have a good representation here. So, digital technologies, correct? Various digital technologies are at the heart of our society, correct? They impact our lives, they impact our businesses, and the delivery of essential services, correct? And the government has been wanting a secure online environment is essential for our government, correct? To provide online services to our citizens. Now, whether you take it like your digital health IDs, you take the India Health Stack, you take the UPI, Bheem, Umang, eSign, so many, correct? And so the government wants the ability to conduct these transactions securely, correct? It's for the delivery of public services, commercial services, communications. So all of these have to be in a secure manner. Correct? So that's where cyber comes in the context of from a nation perspective. And what happens when it goes wrong? Like you would have heard in the recent times, the entire trouble on the Northeast. Now you saw that trouble on the Northeast, and that coincided with a huge number of attacks on our financial infrastructure and our government systems. Financial infrastructure like your banks, your stock exchanges. The various police agencies came out with saying that almost 40,000 attacks in a day on our ATMs and on the stock exchanges came out. So make no mistake, there's cybersecurity is absolute paramount from a national perspective, correct? Because earlier we used to think that hostile nations or enemies will want to bring down the complete infrastructure. Now they want to conduct warfare at an economic level, at an informational level. That's how they operate, and that's why cybersecurity is so critical to our nation.
That's a good answer, Samir. Now, if you look at it, one of the things which we discuss amongst ourselves is the cybersecurity attacks, as you said, is asymmetrical. You just don't require an army; you just require somebody with a verminous mind who can destroy or cripple our systems and so on. So, what would you think about in terms of technology advances which are kind of opening some kind of loophole in the security systems for us?
Yes. So the technology advances are phenomenal, correct? And I'll use it in the context of some of the other types of warfare that we've seen, correct? So I covered the civilian aspects of it. Now we'll cover the sort of an espionage aspects of warfare, correct? Now a common manifestation of espionage is like spying, correct? In earlier days, we would have hands and feet on the ground who would put into specific scenarios. Now what happens is you have online spies. You can deposit information mines into command and control systems of various countries, correct? You can auto extract information from these systems, which will be delivered to you. Gigabytes and terabytes of data can be extracted without the other enemies coming to know about it. That traffic can be masked. So it's almost like you're not able to identify what type of traffic is going outside of your organization or country. Correct? You don't know where the attack is coming from because the IP addresses are masked as well. So for the IP address is basically an identification mechanism for you to operate on the internet. So even that is masked. So the ability to identify who is attacking you, what type of information is being extracted gets masked completely. Another example of an advancement is in the context of sabotaging. Now, for people who are familiar, nuclear facilities, correct? And a very famous attack which happened on the Iran nuclear capabilities, correct? It was a worm called Stuxnet. That took Iran back to the Stone Age in terms of nuclear capabilities. I'm sure some of the leadership here would be aware more from a government perspective. But it was massive. It was launched from a mix of Western groups, but it really took Iran back years back in terms of ability to come back to that capability. And unfortunately, that same worm was used against India to compromise INSAT 4B satellite communication for a period of time. So these advances are moving at a phenomenal pace, correct? Similarly, propaganda. You would have heard about how propaganda is used for election purposes, correct? You would have bots which are created. Bots are nothing but small independent software code which runs and responds in a manner that a human would. So you would have bots which would create LinkedIn profiles, fake LinkedIn profiles to hire people, fake LinkedIn profiles to drive propaganda that an enemy country wishes to, or an ideology that they want to push onto the audience. So then you would have another aspect of warfare is economic disruption, like worms which are being used to take down health systems. Like the classic one was WannaCry. WannaCry took down the entire UK national health system. So the technology is advancing at a phenomenal pace. And as Suresh said, cyber covers various aspects. So you have AI now. And AI is again is significant, correct? Because it gives the ability for machines to take action, to do the analysis, and move it from there. So technology is pervasive across our environment, and cybersecurity needs to be weaved in, right? Yeah, Suresh, I'll stop there. Just that was a view of various technologies and how it's from a context of warfare.
So that leads me to the next question, Samir. When we talk about technologies, we have to get ourselves into the learning cycle once again. And some of the learning curves are pretty large, and then you need to apply this in areas which is productive areas. You talk about real business scenarios. So how do we as in the people who are running businesses or individuals stay ahead of this, and how do the cyber criminals manage to stay ahead of this?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and in fact, if I could solve it, then it would be a big one, because the cybersecurity talent question is a pressing one. We have millions of outstanding jobs globally from a cybersecurity perspective. But there are various ways, Suresh. Organizations can. I'll answer it from a context of an organization and an individual first. And I'll give an analogy to a house, and I use this often. So consider cybersecurity to be like a house. When you step outside your house, you lock your door and you go out, correct? You keep the key with you. You close the windows and you go out. You don't leave the back door open. The key is only available with specific members of your family, correct? The security of your house depends to an extent in which area you are located, in which society you are located. If you're located in an area which is known for robberies and other issues, then you'll have more security for your house. So similar to cyber. Cyber is like your house in which you want to secure all of these environments. You need to do basic hygiene for your organization, right? So try to look at it from that context. It helps you understand cybersecurity better. And Suresh, there are various basic practices which an organization can do, correct? In a cheap manner, not it doesn't cost you an arm and a leg. It's cheap, wherein you can deploy these things. There are open source resources available to secure your businesses, and it's available on Google. It's available by various cybersecurity agencies. Even the Indian Ministry of Electronics and IT provides a number of tools to augment and protect your safety of your business. Again, if someone needs specific, then we can take that offline and provide that. So Suresh, I know you asked about individual and business. There was another aspect you asked as well that eludes me.
The cyber criminals, how do they, when you talk about the dark net and the deep web, and they are quite resourceful to gain knowledge and then penetrate our systems. How do we stay ahead of this?
Correct. So they do something that we don't do very well. They do collaboration and integration in a fantastic manner. So when you operate on the dark web or on the internet or in hacker circles, code is shared across hackers. Tooling is shared across hackers, activists. these resources are easily available. Trainings are easily made available by hackers to one another. Correct? And finally, it is their own interest and passion that drives them. Correct? Sometimes it is hacktivism that drives them, wherein they want to get the better of other organization. But more often, cyber criminals or hackers are motivated by economic reasons. So they have a reason to learn. They want to make money out of it, or they want it to demonstrate their capabilities. So they are more passionate about it. But yeah, a lot of resources on this stuff is available free, and there's massive collaboration that happens among them to share knowledge, to share vulnerabilities of where environments are weak and where our defenses are weak. That's excellent stuff that happens there.
Thanks, Samir. Quickly moving on to Ruchika, building on from what Samir was talking about, Ruchika, what I would like to ask you from your perspective is looking at it, cybersecurity definitely is an issue at a national level. All the developing countries have done more and they continue to do more. With respect to us, what are the main statutes and regulations that promote data protection, cybersecurity?
So from India perspective, we have IT Act of 2000. That's definitely something that becomes our binding force when it comes to anything to do with IT or cyber. Apart from that, we also have silos. Like the reason I use the word silo is because it's not integrated. We have, for example, our own CERT team, we have our defense attaches, we have forensics. So all of these departments do exist in India. I think the problem that comes around is that there's no cybersecurity law, or there's no specific policy or a governance model or all those aspects that will drive all these departments to be able to work together. So that's where I think India is slightly challenged, that while we have, so for finance, I've worked in quite a few banks in my career, and I know that we are heavily regulated. Banks are heavily regulated. So you'll have their own cybersecurity policies driven by RBI and SEBI. Similarly, the healthcare industry has some bit of cyber or IT related regulations. For when it comes to cyber crime, the lawyers will advocate that we have enough and more than enough available in the IT Act of 2000. But when I look at it from an outside perspective, and I look at it as a view, what I see is that all of this exists, but none of this talks to each other. So because that is where I think I would say that India definitely requires to have their own cybersecurity law and a policy that drives that law. So,
okay. So quickly moving from there, if you have to do an analysis on, on two hands, one, you have the private enterprises. Yes, all of us worked in a bank. We know banks, regulations, and rules. You can be fired if you don't, align to the name rules and things like that. But when you look at the private segment and also look at the government, what do you think, if you do a SWOT analysis, where do we stand very well in terms of our strengths, and where are there opportunities to look at this?
Okay, I thought I'd put up some quick slides together just to make it more visual than a monologue from my end. So I'll share my screen so that I can try and give you a brief overview of how I see India analysis. So while I was talking about the cybersecurity law, I want to start with a quote that there is no silver bullet when it comes to a solution for cybersecurity. It has to be a layered defense mechanism. It's not just layered as in the vertical layer, it also has to be horizontal layering. So the first thing that as the nation we should do is identify our critical assets, our critical infrastructure, our high profile individuals. So once we have identified our crown jewels, then we build around the whole mechanism around it. It's the same military strategy, that how we have defense set up in multiple layers before it reaches our country. So you have border force, you have air force, you have navy, and so on and so forth. The exact same approach is what we use at cybersecurity as well. So I put up a quick picture out here, and this is something that is heavily leveraged in our day-to-day conversations when we are forming a cybersecurity strategy or a policy for a corporation. But when I started to review this from a nationwide perspective, this fits perfectly from that angle as well. I'll say So let's say I know for India, we have finally decided that we will have our own cyber strategy available, and we have given ourselves over 5 years to be able to define that. One thing that's for sure is that it shouldn't take us 5 years. It's, in my humble opinion, it should take us lesser than that. And the other thing, what we should do is we should try and come up with all these avenues that what is the policy that will drive it? What are the playbooks? How is the whole prevention coming into play? What are the operations that, okay, now I have the policy, I have set up the text around it, but who's going to do it? So that's where the operations comes into picture. Then comes that we have enough and more than enough data being churned out of India. So the data security aspect is something that we have to heavily invest in, not just from a perspective that, okay, I have decided I have to secure my data. It's not easy. Even writing this slide is not easy. So imagine a scenario where you have to kind of implement all this at a nation level. So that is where the real challenge starts, that we have to kind of work together, joint public and private forces, to make sure that we have all this taken care into application security. One example that comes to my mind is Arogya Setu. India was one of the first nations that came up with the contact tracing. Commendable job there. But what happened? 1 month down the line, it was hacked, thankfully by an ethical hacker. It was not something that was gone into dark web and our data was available. But at the same time, we know for sure that our Aadhaar data is easily available on the dark web. You can buy it for a few $1,000s. So that is where the application security comes in. While we are digitizing India, we are taking India towards the level where we will make sure that everything and anything is available online. What we need to focus on is the application security layer. How and what are we doing to make sure that the tools that we have decided or the applications that we are building, are they protected enough? The next layer comes is the endpoint security. Now, when I talk about endpoint security, this is where the layman like me, Samir, Suresh, yourself, we all will come into picture because we are the end users. Now, at a corporation, it's easy for me to implement because I can put controls out there. I can ensure that my mobile devices that I'm using or laptops are fully secure. But when you open it to the entire nation, the innovation has to be brought in. How we will think of endpoint security. Then, of course, comes the network security, and perimeter security is something that we can heavily focus on, that create honeypots. Honeypots is a technology in which you create an area where the it's a term that we use quite often, is that the not so matured hackers or the ones who are just trying to get into the systems and figure out if they'll find something that they can sell off. Or you create a very matured honeypot, even where, let's say, we're focusing on China in this session. So in case if China is doing those attacks, the first thing that should be easily available to them is the honeypots. Now, through honeypots, you can gather intel, you can gather a lot of information there, and you can try and control these aspects before, and you can, of course, mitigate them. So that's one area which we can easily focus on. It doesn't take a lot of effort. And of course, so on and so forth, then comes the outer threat protection, and the innovation and AI is the lead there. So we can get into the depth of that as we move forward in the session. Going ahead, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Ruchika.
Okay. I wanted to also bring in more formally on what exactly is my own view on when it comes to India cybersecurity strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So one thing which I definitely see as a great positive and the biggest strength that we have in comparison to China and some of the nations like China is that we have the freedom to use internet. Like, that's the most important thing, that we have not restricted our nation, our citizens from using the internet. It's still free. While we are working towards banning some of the apps, we are trying to work towards making it secure. But overall, if we see, we are the #2 nation in the world of internet users. Our internet usage has increased by 77% in past few months, thanks to Geo and COVID situation, with students being logged in remotely to do their schools, colleges, so on and so forth. So that's where it's a strength. And of course, when we see that we have now allocated a budget to finally decided, okay, this is going to be our cyber strategy. That's the other thing which I see as a very big strength for India, is the population that we have the masses, we have well-educated scores and scores of engineers available, we have innovators, we have our own gaming firms and gaming enthusiasts. Munjal is definitely one of them, and it's good to have him here. So overall, if we see that in comparison to China, it's not that we don't have the basics that we require to be able to build our own workforce. What is needed to be able to further develop on these strengths is that we do countrywide workshops. It does happen in silos. There are firms that will do cyber awareness sessions. There are firms who are doing these trainings to make sure that people are aware of these activities, but we have so far not worked on building a workforce. When I say workforce, in comparison to China, where they have now gone down to civilians also. So civilians are also equally trained in case if they are required to launch an attack. Well, I think we should not be in that zone ever, that we are launching attacks or trying to get intel through cyber attacks, but we should be strong enough that tomorrow, if I require to put up my cyber army together, I have trained workforce available. At the same time, while we have the population, we have engineers, we have gaming enthusiasts available, we should work with government, or rather government should be able to join public sector, private sector, academic institutions to strengthen our cybersecurity knowledge. So we do have some curriculum available, but it's still at its nascent stages. It's building. For example, my daughter definitely has one subject known as cyber awareness and digital literacy. So that's one area which I noticed that from a weakness point of view, I'll say that digital literacy is definitely a weakness for our country. It's like I was telling you that 75% increase in internet usage in rural areas. Now, we are, of course, in the COVID situation, providing smartphones to students. It's a very noble cause. It's, of course, good that we are making sure that they are getting the devices to be able to do the schooling. At the same time, we have to make sure that they understand how all this works. What is good enough? What is not something that they should venture into? What are the controls? And not just the students, I would say our elder generation that was not technology native, but has been introduced to smartphones and mobile devices and internet, and they don't know whether it's a phishing attack or it's a fraud or so on and so forth. So that's where we need to make sure that we are focusing on the digital literacy aspect. The other thing which we should think about is how we can build a zero trust architecture. So I was telling you about the defense in depth. There's a new term that has been coined recently, at least globally, is that you form your architecture. The infrastructure that you will build is basis zero trust. I don't trust anyone. I will not trust anything and any connection that's coming in. And that's how I'm building my force or my infrastructure. Then comes that I know we, of course, get a lot of defense, I don't know what's the right word, but we get a lot of influx of our hardware and software from other nations, including China. We heavily rely on Russia and China for our defense strategies or requirements. So while we may still leverage it, what we should be working on is having a secure baseline. I will harden my hardware and software to make sure that while I got it from whosoever I got it, I will make sure that it is strengthened by making sure that the image or the operating system that it's running on or the controls that I'm supposed to put in, and then it follow the same zero trust architecture combined with least privileged access. So it's not that, okay, there's a device available, there's a software available, and if it's open to everyone. My strategy should be it's not open to people until they require access to my hardware and software at the backend level. That's something that from a weakness point of view, we can focus on. Opportunities, when we talk about, Sami briefly alluded to this, is that we integrate our armed forces. So the cyber intelligence, and I would definitely want to know that if it's already happening, it's great if we are already doing that. But there's more opportunity in which we are able to combine the cyber intelligence that we get from our various defense mechanisms and then leverage it to make a nationwide security model. That's something that we should be focusing on. The other thing is we touched upon the young population, but there is not just in India, but globally, there is a dearth of skilled cybersecurity professionals. So we should be a strategy that we put together, that how will we make sure that at least in India, we will have the strategy, the policy, the governance, all of that is written, but who's going to implement it? So we need to have our trained workforce available who are professionally working in the cybersecurity arena. Then comes this area where, in IT Act, you have some snippets of details available in case if there is a cyber crime that happens or things that needs to be dealt with. But overall, if you see, it's driven by the jurisdiction. So where I am going and reporting it as an FIR. Now, when I go and report it to the Cyber Cell of India, from what we have understood, they don't have a great playbook or a knowledge repository that, okay, for this use case or this scenario, this is what we need to do. This is how we manage. So it's more like case to case basis. I will come up with scenarios and I will try and figure out how I can contain that attack, or how I will make sure that the person who attacked is arrested, so on and so forth. So that's where I think from an opportunity point of view, we should focus. We have quite a few cyber firms, and there's a new thing that has recently, in past couple of years, that's come up, is that companies who can't afford having a formal cybersecurity team because of the budget's constraint, or the strategy of that company is not to focus on those areas, they can still very easily get the basics of cybersecurity right by simply hiring a virtual CISO or a cyber firm that will do this work for them. So that brings us to the threats. So of course, we'll get into the details of threats in the coming slides and the discussions that we'll have with Munjal. But just to indicate on those aspects, that the warfare is no longer a simple that, okay, you have a man and there's an army and there's Navy and Air Force. Even in the cyber arena, it's gone hybrid. So I'm not going to just simply attack your high profile individuals or your army. I may go ahead and attack all of it together, or I may collect intel from all of these areas and I will be able to form in profiles. So when I look at it, because of the hybrid nature of the cyber warfare, Army, Navy, Air Force, space especially is equally vulnerable, and it needs to be taken into account that all these critical infrastructure of India needs to be protected also in that hybrid fashion. Information warfare, we discussed briefly about it, the intellectual property, or the recent one was China snooping on around 10,000 high-profile individuals of India, including smaller firms like Zomato, Flipkart. Even their CEOs were being targeted and being profiled by China. So that's something that is a very simple way of indicating that there's a term that I often use in my sessions is social currency. Now, when I say social currency, that what it means is that how are you engaging on social media? What are you doing on social media aspects, or Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram and so on and so forth? So how you spend that currency. So whatever you're doing on the internet, one thing is for sure, it never gets deleted. No matter how much we think that, okay, I have deleted it, I have gone to the firm and requested for deletion, it never goes away. It's always there. Not in maybe that specific firm, but somewhere else. So that's where every individual in India needs to focus on how are they spending the currency? What are they doing about it? And then cyber crimes are, of course, there, cyber terrorism, hacktivism. So what we need to do is convert our reactive approach into more proactive way of managing it. And then, of course, come up with a cybersecurity operations for India as a nation. I know it exists. It is there, definitely there. We have our own incident response teams, and it is working in a way it should. But what happens is that it's limited to the government infrastructure, the state government, the central government, or the defense infrastructure that we have. What I'm trying to propose is that we leverage these services to increase education. At the same time, we work towards coming up with our own monitoring, our own governance, and very, very strong governance. Like, even if, let's say, I know there was a question on ethical hacker. So while we are educating people, there also has to be very strong mechanisms put in together that we are able to control our own workforce. We have trained them, we have given them the meat that, okay, now you know how cybersecurity works, what all you can do with it. But at the same time, there needs to be firms, there needs to be a control that needs to be put together. And that's another area where we can leverage the cybersecurity firms that are readily available in India. I'll take a pause and see, Munjal, if you sorry, Suresh, in case you want me to touch upon other aspects or anything specifically.
That's done very neatly, Ruchika. I think you actually created a good pitch, or you spun a story which talks about where our strengths lie. It's like a team which is playing a sport. You have members in the team. Each one has his or her own strength, but your objective is to score a goal or hit a 4 or 6 and things like that. We are kind of missing that. We are not leveraging our best efforts and things like that. Yes, you're right. Our population is huge. Our engineers numbers are very high. And also, I go back to the weakness point where you mentioned about the zero trust. In the bank, we are told trust but check. We have to check, we have to double check, we have to check once again before we can let anything go into production and so on. Opportunities are huge in terms of the availability of growing your enterprise businesses, making sure that you have ease of use of your transactions online and things like that. But we also need to know that COVID definitely has made us get into the remote login and remote use of technology and things like that. But are we supervising our younger generation well to ensure that they are not getting into situations like cyberbully and cyber terrorism and so on? That's one of the areas we have to talk about. And threat is there always. Like the more you adopt to technology, the more you're letting it open if you don't have the controls in place. So you did it pretty well. Thanks, Ruchika. Now I'll just switch over to Samir for one question before I go to Munjal. Samir, if you look at the points that were made by Ruchika, especially in the SWOT area, how would you look at India and China in terms of cybersecurity capabilities? I'm talking both about the offensive and the defensive mechanism. When you talk about cybersecurity, one of the areas which we talk about is how do we plant the propaganda which will help them to be misled in some way and so on, if I may use that word. So looking at it from the offensive and defensive side, Samir.
Yep. So China cybersecurity capabilities. The way I'll answer that, Suresh, I'll sort of go back a couple of decades to see how China started on this journey. Correct. So for China, there, and then I'll come to the India context or the impact to India. So going back a couple of decades, 1990s is when China started their academic discussions around. They didn't even have the cybersecurity terminology was not there. It was information warfare, correct? So that's when their discussion started, and it was the trigger for that were the use of technologies, the use of weapons in the Gulf War, the UN action in Kosovo, Afghanistan, so all of and Iraq. So China realized that there is no way you can defend yourself adequately with just kinetic warfare. Correct? Information warfare is the new way to wear down an opponent. Correct? As economic and information warfare. And I think there is a book called Unrestricted Warfare, which was written by two ex-PLA staff. And Unrestricted Warfare, that was later translated into English. If anyone gets their hands on it, really nice book around the Chinese military doctrine. So 1990s is when their academic discussion started, and 97 is when they set up the first information warfare unit, like a 100-member unit set up by their military commission. Single aim, correct? Develop viruses, plant viruses into the defense, into the command and control systems of various Western nations. Simple objective. Okay. So that started way back. I said 1997. That's when they started doing this, and they have been practicing this. So turn of the century, 2000 onwards, obviously they ramped up their information warfare units to an extent where I think today they almost have 12 independent units operating throughout the country, which can launch information warfare. Right. So again, from 2000 onwards, they conducted numerous warfare or exercises against Taiwan, understandably, US, Japan, and India. Correct. So they hacked into the Dalai Lama's network, various stuff. They launched various exercises which were basic, starting with penetration testing. You're trying to intrude into someone else's network, and the objective is to steal data. Filter data out, correct? Understand what are these organizations doing, what are these countries doing, and with all of that data, and then use that when required at the appropriate moment. So whenever China would have a discussion, whether with the US or with India, their intelligence would have already briefed the leadership on these are all the things that are being discussed or being thought around from a country perspective. Okay. So from 95, 2000 onwards, in a couple of years, there would be hundreds of these exercises which would be done. Right? And one exercise, like what happened from an India attack during this the entire Northeast saga, the cyber attack, that would be one exercise which would contribute to like 40, 50, 60,000 attacks in a day. Correct? So that would be one exercise. It just gives you an understanding of the scope and the size of the attack. So 2000 was again a key moment, because 2003 is when China operationalized their Great Firewall. Correct? I know there is a question on social media, and I'll touch upon that. So 2003 is when they operationalized the Great Firewall. So complete isolation of China from the wider internet in the globe. So the focus was obviously on self-secure and operating China from a self-sufficiency perspective. Okay, so that's when the firewall operationalized. Their hacking activities, information warfare continued into the later part of that first decade. By the end of, I think, say 2010, they had got the ability to penetrate US and European networks at will. They could penetrate at will without any sort of issues coming back from those governments, correct? And they were exporting huge amounts of data, gigabytes, terabytes of data were coming out from these countries, and China was then obviously using big data, data mining, all of these technologies to mine that data and develop intelligence, right? And I'll later on, if you get time, I'll dovetail into how all of this data then feeds into AI, correct, for them to develop intelligence. So that's a separate one on its own, but so that's how the data is also being used. The last part of that decade, 2008, 2010, China extensively mapped Indian government networks. They knew them in and out. National Informatics Center, Ministry of External Affairs, they knew the networks very, very well. What documents were there, right down to our own advisor, Mr. M.K. Narayan, admitting that his assets were under attack as well. So that's the level that they had achieved in terms of their capabilities. And this I'm talking just like the first decade of 2008, like 2008, 2010, that duration. Correct? And these are skills they have developed which are used during peacetime. It's not even a war scenario. So you understand that this scenario, when translated into a war, they already have these capabilities to do these things. Right? Similar time duration, 2010 is when they also enforced that you have to hand over your source code for companies who want to operate in China, like notably Microsoft. If you want to operate in China, you have to give over your source code. Very intelligent, because then they use the source code to inform their engineers how to develop attacks, because Microsoft is used heavily across the globe, and that's why Internet Explorer is a browser you shouldn't use at all. Similarly, IBM handed over its source code for some of its products. Cisco, from a router perspective, handed its source code. The moment Cisco handed its source code for these routers, the next year similar products were available across the globe, because China obviously used that to build and replicate those routers. What happened then was 2013, the Edward Snowden scandal, massive issue, leakage, which reiterated China's stance that the US government was spying on companies and on individuals. Correct? NSA was tapping rampant across various organizations. Correct? So China then just doubled down and saying, no, we will not. The firewall was operationalized. You have to hand over your code, if you want to operate in the country. And the Snowden scandal was funny because that elevated Edward Snowden's status in China to a cult level. People wanted to hack like Snowden. He was their idol, correct? So everyone, the interest in cybersecurity just zoomed, like 200% just went through the roof. So that's how it, that's how their capabilities kept increasing, and I think the strategy was just playing very well with what global events were happening. And I think this is a good time to answer one of the question around social media and the role that we're playing. So one of the reasons China operationalized the Great Firewall was because they saw what happened during 2009 Iran's presidential election. Correct? The election results were not in favor; they were rigged, or the issues therein, and large-scale protests broke out across the country. Correct? The entire Arab Spring events across Middle East. Correct? Occupy Wall Street, the London riots, all of these social media played a massive role to help and carry out and plan all of these protests, right down to what is happening in Hong Kong to an extent. You saw all of the protests. Social media plays an absolute key role. So the Chinese government, the CCP, knew that if they have to monitor the internet and social media, correct? Otherwise, this will lead to a social unrest. Correct? Large-scale political instability. So that is the reason that internet and social media are so heavily governed in China, and it places the onus on the operators themselves. So it's called the BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. So they are responsible for policing their own networks. So if someone puts an article out saying, someone a derogatory statement or going against what the CCP wants, then these operators themselves have to take down that particular article. So that's how critical it is. Then you get into, obviously, Mr. President Xi Jinping took over in, I think, early 2012, if I'm not wrong, or that direction, and his influence was notable. So as per him, without cybersecurity, there is no national security. This is his key statement when he set up the leading group for cybersecurity affairs in 2014. His was, without cybersecurity, there is no national security, and without informatization, there is no modernization. It's a mouthful, but basically, cybersecurity was a political priority. Correct? It was a key political agenda. Correct? It elevates cybersecurity to a national strategic initiative. Correct? It's have political, military, economic implications. So that's where they have elevated cybersecurity to. Map it to other countries or map it to India, we are not there yet. Correct? So that's why they have taken it. And so 2014 they did that, and in a couple of years, 2016 is when they released the cybersecurity law. So to sort of give it legal control or give it enforce it from an enforcement perspective, it has legal binding. So that China cybersecurity law plays front center of their entire ICT infrastructure and ICT environment. Correct. So it came into 2016, went into effect 2017. And there are, again, the way they have done it very structured. So then they've put in a law, and then they have, who are the regulators who are going to police it? So you have the China Cyberspace Administration, which is headed by Xi, then leads most of the push. Correct? Then you have Ministry of Public Security. So they lead the Great Firewall, and the entire critical infrastructure protection is under Ministry of Public Security. Then you have Ministry of Industry and IT, which is again responsible for the digital strategies and plans. So see, their IT is separate, and they have another function, cybersecurity, which is completely separate. So one does the digital push, one does the cyber push. And then they have their own organization for security standardization as a technical committee, which comes up with its own security standards, which the CSC, the Cyberspace Administration of China, mandates that you should follow. Earlier, they were voluntary, and then with the recent push into cybersecurity, it's now being mandated. You need to follow China-specific standards if you need to operate here. So it just goes into the cybersecurity law. Again, is wide, just because of it is cross-industry, cross-sector. So it covers, as I said, it's front center, correct? So it covers massive amount of stuff. and it's broken down into almost like 6 key areas. The first is content management, so regulation of content, real name registration. So you need to register with your own name for getting access to the internet, correct? That's how they police who has put in this article online. So you can't post it an anonymous way you would do anywhere else. And then that feeds into your social credit system. So if you keep writing derogatory stuff against the CCP, your social credit will ding you there, correct? So that's your entire content management system. Then you have a multi-level protection system, which is used to use a risk view to drive the protection of the entire infrastructure and across the environment. You have personal information and data protection system. Correct? Then you have network products and services management. And then finally, an incident management system to cover that. So they have, the cybersecurity law is very structured in the way it operates and the way it has been implemented and the number of agencies who are involved. And part of it by strategy is to make certain things at a very high level. So it gives them a broad scope to operate. They don't clarify everything. They leave it a bit ambiguous. So then it is open to interpretation, and then they can use it the way they want it. So their strategy around cybersecurity has been wonderful and should be used as a to learn as well as for India how to put things into place. Suresh?
Thanks, Samir. That was good. The only couple of points I would like to ask, not right now, but at the end, is one is looking at the the talent which is there. Ruchika, yourself, me, Munjal, and Samir, we would have faced this when we are staffing our projects. We never get people either in the digital IT side or in the cybersecurity side. It's more difficult. That question should definitely come up. We'll have an answer for that. But I'm also looking at it. The approach of the Chinese, the CCP, is defining the strategy, the roadmap, talking about tactics, how they're going to get a tactical advantage, and then implementing it, putting it into place. So even in our private enterprises, whether it is a bank or it is the healthcare or it is retail or e-commerce, we look at it very, very clearly. What is our roadmap going to be? And we don't look at a very long roadmap, which is put in place and we forget about it. We rather look at it being tweaked every now and then. Now we'll just move on to Munjal. As discussed, Munjal, we have to look at what is the especially given the current situation with the LHC, what is the areas of importance for us to look at in battlefield surveillance using IoT? What I will do is, Munjal, you have had a look at your deck. Give you a full 20 minutes to go cover your points, and then we'll then skip that to wrap up the session and go to Q&A. Over to you, Munjal.
Right. Thanks, Suresh. I'll quickly, some of these points have been covered, but I'll run through quickly, some of the aspects. Let me just see if I'm able to, my screen being shared. So I just want to make sure, is that visible to everybody now?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So, I just wanted to kind of go, both Ruchika and Samir have done a fabulous job of kind of giving the broader perspective, it is, and, really, really in-depth analysis of where China is, particularly what Samir put out. I'm just kind of taking a step back and saying that let's look at the broader view. What is eventually cyber warfare? It's a strategic warfare in the information age, and cyber warfare has a broad significance to national security, and it goes well beyond military. I think this is one of the key things that if you look at China, it looks at the civilian space, it looks at the financial space, even the healthcare, is again something which is today on the radar. And we've seen attacks on, in UK on the national health security, national health system, So it's no longer about simply just attacking a nation, but it's also about attacking a nation eventually to create a fairly destructive impact, and to a point of even damaging or dismantling some of the digital infrastructure. I think more our societies become digitized and we are online, I think that much vulnerability also goes up. And I think fundamentally, if you look at the US approach and China approach, is when the internet started, US had a very, very open view, whereas China started on the other end of the spectrum. They shut everything down, right? And then they gradually opened it up, and then they heavily monitored. And again, and if you look at it, therefore, today, that battlefield is no longer just territorial borders, be it our actual physical borders or the airspace or the naval space, but it goes much wider, and a lot of it is being fought in cyberspaces, in information mining, and even again, I think when you talk about information, Ruchika touched upon this, it's as much about misinformation. And if you look at it, the whole context has changed very, very dramatically. I mean, when we look at defense today and the way we understand a soldier today, probably 5-10 years back to today, it's a very, very different. The soldier is not today just a human being deployed on the border or a pilot or a sailor. He's a hacker sitting today and inflicting massive damage. And I think China has done really, really a great job in terms of deploying these people. So to give you an example of some of these things, when China started evolving its system, there was a point of time when US actually gave a list of hackers, Chinese hackers, to the Chinese government. So please look into this. These guys are actually attacking us. What China did is, in turn, that they took that list, they actually recruited those people and said that you are now actually working for the government. So if you look at the China playbook, anything goes. Literally, I think they have not missed any single opportunity. Whether if you look at, deploying people, technology, any opportunity they have not missed. So if you look at it today, strategically it's being used for espionage, it's used for sabotage, it's being used for denial of services attacks, and even psychological warfare. I think this again. So if you look at all these aspects, that battlefield has changed dramatically. I think that today the battles are being fought, on all these different spaces. Let me kind of quickly get into this, again, talking about mining of strategic information. And one of the more probably wide-known attacks is the Titan Rain attack, which was basically the US defense systems were attacked and targeted for sensitive information. So when they hacked in, they looked at who are the US defense contractors, From there, they started looking into each of those individual systems, people like Lockheed Martin, Sandia National Laboratories, Redstone, and NASA. They were all hacked and information was mined. And this went on for over 3 years. Now, you imagine today that if some of these computers and systems are open for a period of 3 years, how much data can you actually steal? It's scary, If you
Terabytes.
Exactly. So if you look at it, I mean, even if your systems are open for a day, you can download so much data. I think here, when the Titan Rain was before it was discovered, it was 3 years. The damage it would have done is phenomenal. I think one cannot even assess. And if you look at today, in the intelligence circles, people talk about the fact that actually China is today way ahead than the rest of the world. I think there's a question here about, which country is best, and I think China clearly is really changing the game. While on one side, if you look at it, they have reduced their, possibly the armed forces numbers are going down, but their spends have gone up astronomically, I think probably like 5, 6, 7 times, and a lot of that is being used towards cyber, using cyber warfare. And it's a pretty well thought out strategy, So if you look at what are the other things that one can do, one can obviously do sabotage. When I talk about sabotage, you can disrupt power, hydel dams, water, fuel, transportation, and all of these networks, as increasingly we are, these systems are becoming connected, they are also becoming more and more vulnerable, industrial sabotage. Again, I mean, Samir touched upon this, but the Stuxnet worm, eventually infiltrated every major manufacturing facility, by targeting the SCADA and the PLC systems. And what it eventually did is ruined almost 1/5 of Iran's nuclear centrifuges. Now you look at this, that one simple bomb. I mean, I'm saying simple from the standpoint of a strategy, but look at the damage. It set Iran back by years, and it's just sitting somewhere. Someone said that yes, let's understand the weaknesses. That today virtually every computer-aided manufacturing system uses some kind of program logic controllers, right? If we target those or if we manipulate those, what damage can we inflict? So it was very simple. I think all they did, they eventually looked at it and said that, yeah, if these centrifuges are messed around with, either reducing the speed or, increasing the speed drastically, I think that is all that is needed. And that's what eventually happened. The other scary thing, obviously the Cambridge Analytica, I think today you have the ability to, influence an election. And that is one of the most scary things. And enough has been spoken about, the American election, the Donald Trump, Brexit, and with the UK Parliamentary Committee, there was a comment, by one of the people on the committee. He said that we've gone past the point that we no longer can hold democratic elections. And that's a very, very profound statement to make, that we can't hold democratic elections because every single person eventually is profiled and influenced and knows what exactly that person thinks, what kind of websites he's visiting, so there's a major profile that is being built, and then that is being used, as a tool. So again, I think some of these things are very, very effectively being today used as tools for sabotage. Financial disruption, again, this has been spoken about, but basically, again, manipulating stock markets by fake news or hacking into banks, or even manipulating the foreign exchange market, to devalue a currency, or ransomware attacks on the financial sector. And again, China has done this. Apparently, some of the ransomware attacks, what money is being made is again being used and pumped back into fuel further activities. So it's almost like a self-funding mechanism, that you do ransomware attacks, you collect money and then use that, So if you look at it from a strategic standpoint, it's a very, very well thought out game plan, and this game plan has been evolved over years, over almost probably 20 years, Obviously, psychological warfare is again a very, very crucial aspect, propaganda. And I think this is where TikTok becomes, was such an effective tool, and I mean, most people who obviously are from defense backgrounds would know about the Second World War, the airdrop of leaflets, right? Today, it's much more easier to do because if you have control or access to social media profiles, you can start pushing fake news. Deep fakes is another technology where today all I need is about 5 to 6 minutes of someone's footage, video footage. And that is sufficient for me to manipulate and make that person or create video footage, and I can make him say whatever I want to make him say. And probably 10 years back, this was relegated to a very few select organizations who could do that. This tech is available very easily today. Again, what is happening is that due to cloud computing, this power is easily accessible today. I can just get onto AWS and rent or hire computers, massive amounts of computing power. I can just be bought for a day or two. So again, the point is, if you have the enthusiasm and you can become a hacker and you can have all these resources available to you, and these are being used, these are actively being used today. So when you look at deep fakes in particular, there are enough. If you search for deep fakes, there are enough examples on the net of manipulate footage of Obama, of Donald Trump and other world leaders. And you can see that how easily people are doing this. And this tech is, like I said, that earlier it was relegated to a few companies in the world, few visual effects companies in the world. But today, literally anybody can access this. Again, denial of service is again another strategic tool that is being used. That sometimes when you're in the battlefield, today, there are a lot of active devices. They're communicating with one another, and sometimes that traffic can be hacked, not only hacked, but, you clutter the traffic. So you bombard the system with so much of information, so much of access, traffic that legitimate devices cannot access the network. So that brings it down. And this can, prove, effectively it's like jammers, So if you look at what jammers are, the role they are playing, in a similar manner, this is what the denial of service attack is. Again, the other thing is the deep sea cables. When the data cables which are running between countries, if they are cut, it can have a major impact on, some of these things. So if you look at the whole cyber warfare, it's an offensive force multiplier. While you have active battlefronts, while you have all of this happening, it makes a big difference in terms of what is happening. So if you look at now, if I just go into the battlefield surveillance today, it's been largely, I would say conventionally, it's been largely impersonal. So when you look at strategic intelligence, what we are seeking, we want to know where the forces are deployed, what infrastructure is deployed, sensors. And again, this is just a very interesting image of what happens, how much of data is being transferred between various devices, how much they're talking. This is one approach, and there are experts here who probably know enough about this, but the new age battlefield is highly personalized, So the battlefield is no longer restricted to borders, as I said, it goes much wider, but it's also becoming very, very personal, and I think this is where the whole web of Chinese mobile handsets, Chinese apps, the Chinese cameras, CCTV cameras become very, very effective. I mean, you've already spoken about the fact that, there are a whole bunch of banned apps, and even Chinese apps that are banned. Now, if you look at some of these, and like again here, this is a very interesting statistic that today the Chinese handsets virtually, I believe, have close to 70% of the market share, and out of that, the top 5 brands is actually owned at the back by one company, BBK. Huawei is another one, ZTE, which is, I think, believe now defunct. But a lot of these brands, they are operating in the market, and again, these are cheap phones, right? So the remaining 30% of the market is basically the Samsungs, the Apples, all of that. So if you look at the soldier today or the foot soldier today, right? He's using these kind of cheap devices. Most likely, these are Chinese devices. Right, like even if you see some of the videos that are being circulated on the web on WhatsApp, see the Oppo logo or a Vivo logo in the bottom left to figure out that they are actually using the very same Chinese devices, to record some of this, and look at that. I mean, the kind of data that is being collected is, humongous, right? Whether you know it or not, the handsets collect, names, addresses, frequently dialed numbers, live location history, a lot of that. And if you look at the apps, it goes much further, so they start profiling, right? So they look at who are your family members, where do they stay, right? If you're shopping online on Shein or a Myntra, right, and if you are sitting on the border front and if you do online shopping and you dispatch something to your wife, so they know exactly where your family is, right? They also know, basis the kind of communication you're having on the chat, what is the relationship status, right? How close are you with the family? Are you having illicit relationships? Is your relationship good? Are you vulnerable? So if you look at the whole Cambridge Analytica thing, is that eventually through social media, through the nexus of mobiles and apps, there are close to 5,000 data points, that one can collect. I mean, it's hard for somebody to, today list out even 100 things about oneself you sit down. But the social media networks, and the digital lives that we lead, these systems today know more about us than actually, than we do about ourselves. So, and now let's look at how this is being used on the battlefield, right? So, I know that there is a certain set of active GPS locators, or mobile devices that are active on the battlefront, right? So I know the devices. I have already profiled some of the soldiers, right, through their Chinese headsets, or whether it's about if they're using any Chinese apps, right? Through that, I know that, okay, these cell phones today are active in the battlefront. I know exactly, if I point the satellites, if I use the satellite data, if I correlate it, I know exactly how many of those mobile devices are in the field, right? I can in real time track their movement. If I see a cluster, so for example, if I today see a cluster of mobile devices, I can quickly, determine that, yes, there is a concentration of mobile devices here, potentially on the border, right? That means that there are soldiers probably sitting there, and then use that GPS data to pinpoint a, UCAV strike. Again, even if you're not potentially using a Chinese handset, but if even one of those devices in the field is Chinese, you can scan the Bluetooth, you can scan the Wi-Fi, and also know what are the other devices in the vicinity. So if you look at it, the level of sophistication that today is available, we can really hack into a scenario very quickly, and then leverage it to really at a different level. And again, some of this, we many times, we look at that certain soldiers are targeted, certain people are targeted. It's about profiling you, literally building a single profile for each particular soldier, each particular aspect, a high value target, and then look at what are they doing. For example, if a soldier is on the battlefront, right, he has a family back home. What is that family doing? Does his address book have the number of a drug dealer? Right? What is his online behavior? What kind of stuff is he watching? And all this data can be leveraged. It can be used for blackmailing. It can be used for coercion. A whole lot of things. So looking at what a person is doing online, what device does he have, I can very quickly start, people can start mapping out this, build an entire network, so like there's a term that typically when we build data, this data is today not a linear stack, right? It's a network, right? And this is where what happens is that the big data has eventually looked at using big data in a very efficient manner. And this is where China has really scored, right? They have looked at the entire AI space. They have massive capabilities on AI. Again, I think the one other critical thing is a very scary statistic, right? So Hikvision is world's largest manufacturer of CCTV, right? They have about 19% global share. Ahuva Technology is the second largest manufacturer of CCTV. Hikvision, and all these three put together have close to 56% of Chinese market, right? What China has done today is that they have perfected these tools of snooping, and applying big data, and they've tested it in their own country, on their own citizens. Like Samir already touched upon this, that how effective that mechanism is, right? But these devices or these manufacturers are actually today putting out CCTV cameras. Like Hikvision cameras apparently are also being used in the US in some of their own installations, because they were one of the largest manufacturers. So by default, you would use some of these. And even if you today buy, for example, if you bought a Chinese CCTV camera, for you to activate it, it'll ask you to log on to some Chinese website, create your profile, and then it will give you access to, your own feed. So eventually, this data of CCTV cameras is being used, in an effective manner. So now, if you look at the flip side of it, right? So you have access to a large set of these devices, CCTV cameras accessible to you, right? And I'll cite one example and I'll end my talk. And is that there's a company called SenseTime, which is one of the most valuable AI startups today. And it collects data, analyzes it, and it offers, basically face scanners, right? It has presence detection. And it goes well beyond China. And today, SenseTime is rapidly building its network to international offices, partnerships, R&D hubs, including several in the US. So their vision is to become the dominant force in facial recognition. Now, being a Chinese company, on one side you have something like SenseTime, which is building massive capabilities, on the AI side, and then you have companies like Hikvision and Ahuva, which are actually basically supplying hardware to every major country in the world, have probably 40, 50, 60% of the market share. Both put together, when you mesh both of them together, you literally have eyes and ears across the world, and again, like I said, that this has already been tested and perfected. And there are already debates brewing around the privacy issues inside China. If you start, listen to some of the chatter, you are already seeing that there is pushback by the people. But I think the Chinese government has achieved its objective, that these tools are perfected. And I'll just close with this, Ruchika touched upon this, the recent article which came out, that 10,000 high-profile people in India are being, are under, existing surveillance. But the larger thing is that, Zenhua data has over 2.5 million high-profile people under surveillance globally. I mean, this alone is a very, very scary thought. That and this information has because it got leaked. Right? This is what we know. I think the larger question is, what is it that we don't know about China? And I'll just end my talk with that, and we can take questions. Suresh, we can't hear you.
Suresh, you're muted.
So I'll just wrap up this session by adding a couple of points, and that was well presented, Munjal. Thank you. That was very informative. So we can be as safe and as secure as we want to be as a nation. So we need to look at how we weave in strategy, tactics, implementation plans, bring in subject matter experts from the private sector, because private sector to a large extent is a lot more stronger in terms of cybersecurity at this point in time. And the combination that is demanded at this point in time, which I call it as 3P 2T, is define very strong processes which weaves in a lot of things from different verticals, and also at a national level, the critical stuff. Policies to be drafted, which should be different from the IT policy. We have been living far too long with the IT policy. We need to have a specific focus on security policies. Leverage technology, as China is doing today, in terms of using all these to bring capability in our defense systems, and also in terms of other areas in the armed forces. Training on a regular basis, it is not a one-time fix and forget. Cybersecurity is evolving, and more deeper it is getting more complex. And finally, people. We have all supposed to be much more disciplined in the way we practice hygiene in whatever we do. Digitization is fine, but if we don't look at the lurking dangers around that, we are going to be creating loopholes, which is going to be difficult for us to fix. With that done, it is time for questions.
Thank you, sir. I'll just take on the questions in the chat box.
Thank you.
The first question is by Commodore Vasan, sir. He has asked, how ethical is the role of ethical hackers? Who decides the code of conduct while perhaps there is nothing official about it?
Yeah, I can take that. So ethical hackers, Commodore, are normally meant for organizations. Right? So when so if me as an entrepreneur wants to validate the security of my infrastructure, my systems in my organization, owned by my organization, then I will hire an ethical hacker and work out the scope and agreement and the timeline when you will do the attack and tests everything. So that is very well, has to be documented. Otherwise, I can, it can negatively impact my business. Now, outside of the organization purview, there is nothing binding them. Correct? There is then you're not called an ethical hacker. Then you're a hacker and or a hacktivist, and then there is no rules or regulations binding it.
I'm saying, as a cybersecurity specialist, we have to do the penetration test, which is actually hacking. We have to go into systems when we take up something to do, but we actually do a lot of documentation and follow the non-disclosure agreement. We do a warning. We actually monitor the systems, and then we back out our tools and tell the customer or the client saying that now your system is back to normal. That's how ethical hacking happens. As Samir said, if it is outside of that, people can enter into the system anytime and enter out. It is like joining a Google Meet and stepping out and stepping in again. As simple as that.
Thank you, sir. Second question I have is, what measures can be taken to counter artificial intelligence-based attacks, cyber attacks? It's open to the panel. Anyone can take that, please.
I can answer that, because evidencing of AI-based attacks today is minimal. AI in cybersecurity itself is in the nascent stage. They're only now starting to deploy it at endpoint to detect threats at a endpoint level, like on your desktop or on your laptop, using AI to identify threats. Now, again, that has a high false ratio, correct? So there are a lot of false negatives that come through. So using AI to launch cyber attacks, I wouldn't outright say it won't happen or is not possible. It will happen. It's possible. It's a matter of time. You have to build up your defenses whether at an individual state or at a center level. You have to build up your defenses to secure against them. Hope I've answered that question.
So, sir, let me add to that. When we look at AI, my definition, the way I look at AI, it is augmented intelligence. So it is today adding on to the human intelligence, and that is what we are seeing today. Now, if you look at Cambridge Analytica, what it did, right? It basically mapped all these different data points. The data was inferred, and they built models of basically profiling of a particular user, right? They built models which were sophisticated enough to tell you that if you put out this kind of information, then this particular person can be influenced in this manner, right? And now you are then eventually multiplying this across an entire select group of people, and influencing public opinion, right? I mean, a lot of artificial intelligence is being used to do this. We have actually reached a point today that if you ask people that, do you know how this algorithm works? The answer is no. We don't know, right? Because there is so much data at play here that it's beyond human cognizance. So you've gone, that this works, right? Because you are throwing massive amounts of data at the system. The system is making sense, right? And then using that system effectively. So it's like a black box. And the only way I think to the counter to it is that you build a better black box.
The second next question is by Mr. Prasad. He has asked, post the lockdown announced in March 2020, there has been a tremendous increase in the UPI transaction, which is not seen even in advanced countries like UK and USA. How safe are these transactions? Why these are not popular in other countries?
The bankers, Samir.
Yeah, no worries. So yes, the infrastructure for UPI, for BHIM, is a India stack, correct? It's part of the India stack, and it is quite secure. It works on SSL, it works on HTTPS, clearly encrypted technology. So it's not that it is it's not used anywhere else. It is definitely used in India, pioneered in India, because we sort of almost jumped the entire credit card type of ecosystem, correct? We were offline payment-based country. Credit cards started to come in, but then obviously the government push, and with COVID, we've just leapfrogged over one environment from a credit card, debit card into online UPI-based payments or contactless payments. Other countries in US, credit card was massive, extensively use of credit card. If I give you an example of China, they don't even use a UPI. Everything is QR code based, correct? So you use a QR code. They use that for payment. They use that for chats. They use that for everything, for shopping, everything. You go into China, you try to operate with cash, you will almost go hungry, is what I'll tell you. So coming back to India, it's good that we've leapfrogged, because it sort of takes away a lot of the other challenges that we've had with credit card and the security issues of chip-based, magnetic-based, all of that stuff. So I would definitely say that the UPI has gone through numerous tests, validations, and it continues to be a secure environment for us to do payments.
Thank you, Mr. Samir. I had a question, but it was already answered in the, so I'm just skipping that. Next question is by Colonel Hariharan sir. He has asked, as an intelligence officer in field, we feel the onslaught of social media grey propaganda, and we need to evolve a counter narrative. How can technology help us in this regard? This was a question to Mr. Samir or Ms. Arora. Both of them can take it up.
Social media is so this is one of the reasons why social media is actively policed in China, because of the ability to influence. Similar Cambridge Analytica, the ability to influence voters. And this is why the amount of debate that is on today, even from a privacy perspective, the deliberations at the center are around privacy in terms of where this data should be stored, correct? Who can use it? Because then you get cases like what Snowden revealed, that governments are using this data, they're tapping this data. To the point of defense or armed forces and they being exposed and being, amount of social media that they're exposed to, I think that's where the cybersecurity strategy for the defense forces need to come in terms of what handset firstly is allowed for defense staff who are in critical sectors. Right? So then what is the operating system you should use? Right? Should we use an homegrown operating system? We did come up with it. Our DRDO team did come up with it, but at extensive tests, they canned it and went back to Windows. So counter that with China, which have their own standards committee, they're building their own OS from a defense perspective. So similarly, we need to have the hardware, the operating system, and the apps defined for various situations and people. So for certain defense cadres, this is the only deployment of social media you can have, including for your personal purposes. For lower down the rungs, this is what you can have. Or if you're in a command and control environment, you just can't have mobiles, you have to leave them out. And even when you leave them out, when you start to use them, You can't advertise what role you work for in government, what work you do, you can't talk to. So there are various controls you need to put in place offline and online. Right? So today, I am not aware of how much these are being practiced. And as Munjal alluded, from a surveillance perspective, we are being found wanting on various fronts, is what I'll say.
Thank you,
Also,
Mr.
to just
Samal. The
add
next-
to just to add to one more thought on the defense mobile device management aspects. So there are software available which will help you contain your device, how it is being used. There are VPN channels that will further enhance the security of the device being used. So those are a couple of other solutions apart from, of course, making sure that your presence on social media is limited, going back to that same point that how you are leveraging your social currency. But definitely from a defense point of view, there should be solutions like mobile device management and VPN channels being used. Even if there has to be an interaction with their family or they do have some requirements to, they can't do without being online. It's like we live in the age of internet. But these are the most common solutions, very widely available and should be leveraged if not already.
Thank you very
Also, I
much.
think just to add to this, I think there is a massive need for, basically educating our population that what are the threats of cybersecurity, what are the threats when you are using social media, how vulnerable you are. I think what has happened that in a way, because the Chinese society has actually been using technology, I think at a fairly rapid pace, they have had some head start. But I think we are now adopting, and I think we are adopting at a very, very rapid pace. Question is that the general population today of India is still not that savvy. And a lot of work needs to be done in that space of educating people. Even in the battlefront, for example, simple things like keeping your Bluetooth on or your Wi-Fi on, is bringing in vulnerabilities, or the fact that you're using these devices. So I think it is there is a lot of work that needs to go into this space, of educating people.
Thank you very much. The next question.
Bala, can I just add one word, please?
Please, sir.
Yeah, Heblika here. Just to bring it into perspective, I think the next couple of weeks, the second edition of the National Security Cyber Policy comes into being. Some of the questions which have been addressed regarding social media, what is the mechanism to address it? How is it that it becomes more efficient, and that we do not allow things that have happened in the past to not cause any distractions? I think in a few weeks from now, the National Cybersecurity Policy will come into being. The government is going to announce it. And then also you have the Data Privacy Act that is waiting the approval of the Parliament. Once these two things come, I think we will have a definitive platform. I don't think we will be talking in tentative terms. We'll be talking on, we'll be on firmer grounds. I think that's very important that we need to follow.
Thank you very much.
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you, sir. Next question is from Mrs. Ruchika. Komodo Vasan sir has asked, according to some reports, China's cyber warriors are highly trained, funded, motivated, and prepared to join the hybrid war. Even our certain is supposed to be on the hit list in addition to nuclear facilities, CSASR systems, etc. Have our contingencies being tested by simulating real-time scenarios?
Well, in my humble opinion, I'll say while we are getting there, we are, but still in the stage of being able to write what should be our scenarios, what is our use cases. We have recently started to get involved in putting a cyber strategy together, like we were just discussing about it. So when it comes to testing those scenarios, the most important thing is knowing the scenarios that we need to test. So I think that theory is where we are working on. Once we have it written, then of course we can work towards doing the at least the real-time scenarios. If in case, that's where I think the ethical hacker workforce would come into picture, that we are able to build an entire workforce of our own, which will constantly test us. That in case if tomorrow somebody pulls down a power grid, it's an attack that we are doing it on ourselves, but how are we mitigating it? And how soon are we able to mitigate? Those scenarios is where I think we lack as of today. We should be doing that because in so far, at least in India, going back to that part, that even in healthcare, for example, we haven't really explored aspects where a simple heart valve for a high-profile individual can be attacked sitting somewhere in the world, don't even have to be remotely present there. So those kind of activities we need to constantly test. Those are the scenarios we have to define, and then build upon that. Okay, I was able to attack, I was able to infiltrate and get into the systems. And then also at the same time, very important is that we do the detailed analysis on root cause, what led us to this, like how the scenario was successful. The other thing what we should do is define the lessons learned. Okay, I have learned this lesson. Now this goes into my knowledge repository or playbook, that should this happen, I know step by step what am I supposed to do. So that's, I think, still lacking, but I'm quite positive we'll get there in months to come.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ruchika. I have a question to Mr. Munjal. I need to know, US-based China Aerospace Studies Institute, CSA report says China has the capacity to conduct cyber attacks at ground stations with the intention to corrupt or hijack the systems to control satellites, including spacecraft. What should India be doing in this regard?
See, I think, obviously we need to build systems. We need a capability to respond to some of these, So I think today, if you look at cyber attacks, there are effectively two approaches. One is the offensive and the defensive, and I think we need to build capability on both fronts, So when you are being attacked, you should be actively able to respond to an attack and shut off such attacks, right? So I think this is a kind of a new force that is needed. Like US has a division called the US Cybercom, which basically actively looks at this. They treat it as a wing of the army, of the defense forces. Even China has, like Samir has spoken at length about this. Even China has a full-fledged department around this. Question is, obviously, today not much is known about this. Obviously, these things are state secrets, so we may not know about what our government is doing about it. But I'm sure that there are teams, there are measures that are put into place, and like Eblikar sir said, that some of this information will probably come out, as the policy is being announced. So I think, yes, we need to build capabilities, and moving forward, I think we will need to invest more and more money towards it. But it's also about building a larger ecosystem. I think we need centers of excellence, in cybersecurity, which will groom talent, right from a very, very early stage. Like how we had the
I think there seems to be a disruption. We lost him, I suppose. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Munjal. The next question is for Mrs. Ruchika. Mr. KV Thomas has asked, can you enlighten the legislations pertaining to data management and security without compromising privacy, while governments enter into contracts with foreign multinational corporations for undertaking such tasks, especially in matters such as COVID cases?
Yes, so from a data management perspective, I think India is heading in the right direction by bringing in their own data residency policy and law towards it. So a lot of multinationals that I have worked for, and we have been informed that the bill is currently sitting in Parliament and needs to be approved and is still in a draft state. But the multinationals have already started preparing for that scenario where that tomorrow, in case if there is a requirement to have personal data of Indian citizens to be hosted in India, how will we work towards it? And thanks to the third-party cloud providers like AWS, Azure, GCP, we are able to now ensure that all of that data is contained in India, irrespective of whether it's a multinational providing you a service or product or hardware. Alongside, I think what India should focus on is also leveraging some of the standards from NIST framework. One thing which I heavily leverage in Samir, I think has a great solution towards it, is leveraging the CIS control. It's a Center of Information Security that entire firm works towards providing you how you will harden your devices. When we say harden, that means that you will ensure that it will, the image that's there or the way the device is being managed or controlled, it is driven by such heavy controls that your data will not get leaked unless it's on the internet or over the public internet. So at least from the device level, you'll be able to control those aspects. So between the data residency law and coming with some of these controls, we will be able to control these aspects.
There's also a question by Mr. Thomas to Mrs. Ruchi Arora. He has asked, in your presentation, it was indicated that a weakness in cybersecurity, among other things, was mentioned as forensic and investigative field. But according to some cyber experts, the status of Indian agencies, especially intelligence and investigative agencies, are at par with many Western countries, including Israel. Can you please comment on this? He has asked.
Sure, yes. So, of course, I do acknowledge that we have capabilities. We are forensic and investigative agencies are at par with some of the world-renowned agencies that are available. What I was trying to indicate was that it is still running in a silo. So I will not be able to say that, okay, if it's a financial industry related investigation, I will have a different belt altogether. If it's defense, I have something else running. But I don't have a consolidated view. The intelligence agencies today do not actively engage with each other. That's one thing. The other thing is that I have noticed is being able to leverage that intelligence in a way that you're able to form your own, going back to that same topic, that, okay, I got one intelligence or an investigative agency has come up with this specific scenario, which is currently impacting healthcare. Am I making sure that all of this information, without the firms requiring, is being cascaded to the rest of the industry sectors like banks, industrial, IoT, nuclear? So all of them get to know about. So that transparency is something that needs to be worked upon. That's one thing. The other thing, what I think, let me see, from a cyber expert perspective that we are talking about, we should also be able to see that these investigative agencies, how deep are they in the dark web? Had it been that we had that capabilities, we wouldn't have heard scenarios like our Aadhaar data was sold over the dark web. So the entire data was sold for a few thousand of dollars, or so on and so forth. So those scenarios is where I think our investigative agencies should be able to heavily invest effort and workforce in. Another aspect is about e-discovery. I know the attack happened. I have somehow contained it, but have I been able to identify where was the attack triggered from? With the dark web, with the browsers like Tor, you don't really know where exactly is the attack coming from. Even from my own mobile device, I can simply change the IP address where I'm operating from. So all of those things is where I think the investigative agencies should be focused on and leverage the tools and the AI capabilities that we have available, or build ourselves. We have great innovators available in India as well, that try and form a whole map that, okay, social media, these are the threats, these are the profile individuals. So, and one thing which I definitely very heavily insist on is that remember that we are all targets. So that's the focus of, from my perspective, of investigative agencies, that they keep in mind that the entire nation, every individual in the nation is a target, because somewhere or the other we are helping in profiling. So those are a few aspects that I can allude to as of now.
Security model so far. Two, what is the scope and challenges for international cooperation in cybersecurity arena?
Okay, well, when it comes to cybersecurity model, I would very humbly say that there is no such country or a nation that I can say is fully matured and is right there, because the cyberspace is evolving by the day. By the hour, it keeps changing. So I may think that, okay, I'm matured enough, I've reached to that state, but then the hackers, they have enough amount of time and patience to build further on the technology that we may have thought that, okay, this is all we need. So there's definitely need for more. But I think US is quite there. Russia definitely has its own capabilities. And I wouldn't discount China as well. They are pretty matured in the way they are managing their cybersecurity law, how they are containing it. While it may be not digestible from an Indian mindset, but at least from the way China is operating, their websites, you can't read through stuff because it's written in Mandarin. The other thing that how PLA is ensuring that they will train the masses is that they have an official channel known as CCTV Channel 7. So all they do is over there tell you how the offensive techniques can be used, how to protect yourselves, so on and so forth. So I would say between US and China, that we have good competition with India. And India is in its very, very nascent stages. We have reactive approaches, but we definitely have a lot of work to do to be able to call ourselves as a strong cyber model.
Thank you, Mrs. Ruchika. Next question is by Komodo Vasan, sir. He has asked, many inside China, despite the great firewall citizens, have found ways to overcome them by using VPNs, which made China seek details of use of VPN. What options would be still available within China, Hong Kong, or even Tibet to overcome the firewall?
I think those options, Commodore Vasan, are go down by the day in terms of numbers or options, because the Chinese regulators, and specifically the MPS, Ministry for Public Security, ongoing manner keeps patrolling these VPN footprints and eliminates them. So VPN was always something that was an option to get data out, to get videos out or intelligence out, and that continues to go down. So there is smaller and smaller opportunities for us to leak data outside.
Also to add, for China, they have the ports controlled. So for the entire China as a nation, you have at max 4 or 5 ports from which the data can get out. And the entire ISP structure that they have put together is equivalent to their railroad infrastructure. So it's highly complicated and yet fully controlled using the ports. So for them, while they are able to get some bit of information out, most of it is still very contained. And I would have my own opinion there, that how do we know that what is getting out is also not a propaganda from China? So what we get to see is maybe something that they want us to see. So that's where I leave it. That it may be coming out, but definitely not something that their government may not be aware of.
Thank you. Commodore Udairao sir has asked a question to Shri Suresh Bulusha sir. Most cyber security complaints go to the police. I think they are not prepared. Your comments, please, on this.
Okay. My take is like this, first of all, yes, it goes to the IT cell, and now there's a cyber cell for police. And I had the good fortune of interacting with one of the leaders of cyber security cell in Bangalore, one to me and Mr. Sanjay Sahai. There are multiple reasons why they don't do a great job at this point in time. But definitely, they're not prepared in terms of having the technology, the understanding, and I would say the wherewithal. So look at it, cyber crime, when it is committed, it first has to be booked under certain law, statute. It could be fraud, it could be child trafficking, it could be pornography and things like that. The law dictates different things. So what basically is missing there, Commodore Uday, is that there is no strategy in terms of what cyber security encompasses and where you let go and where you hold it. Number two is, if that is done, then you have to look at the tactical approach of how do we solve this problem. Many times what happens is, even in the recent cases that have been reported, you don't get evidence because evidence could be residing somewhere outside the country. It could be in a server in a data center in US or somewhere. You don't have evidence. So without evidence, you cannot proceed further and so on. So there are a lot of challenges, but not to mention that these challenges will be there if we have a documented process, which is very easy for us to put in place. Once we put in place, train our people to use technologies and leverage the benefits of faster closure, I think we should be able to do it. But you're right, they're at this point in time, they're not very well prepared. Anyone from the panel wants to answer? Okay.
Thank you, sir. I have a question. With regard to, this can be taken anyone from the panel. With regard to elections, how safe is India and our electronic voting machines from cyber threats?
If it is digitized, it can be hacked. As simple as that. So you have to provide a perimeter security. So if you look at what Ruchika had alluded to, she said, there are different levels of security that needs to be done. And so when you talk about electronic voting machine, what are we trying to protect? The protection is for the ballot that is being entered or captured, being put in by somebody else. So we need to find ways and means of testing it thoroughly, ensuring those security practices are in place. Otherwise, why India? Nowhere in the world elections will be fair and free.
Thank you, sir. There's a question by Mr. Thomas. It is to Mr. Manjal. Yes, sir. Surveillance in action doesn't have limitation in our fight against terror extremist outfit, especially the Maoist and ISIS elements. Operating with anti or counter surveillance mechanism, even the most advanced agencies could not build up adequate operational data against the key players of such outfits. Perhaps such mechanism will be more useful in the case of elite groups.
I mean, yeah, I think I kind of agree with the comment, because we need to up the game, and today I think is that with the tools that are available, anybody can educate himself in the art of cyber warfare, and that information is available to the good guys and the bad guys. So I think it's eventually about constantly ups. Surveillance measures is very adequately trained. There is no single sort solution to this. It's a constant process. You have to continually upgrade and continually train people, to be the best.
Thank you, sir. We have come to the end of the plenary session 1 for day 2 in what has been a very insightful discussion. I thank the session chair, Shri Suresh Burushu, sir, for chairing the session. I thank all the presenters, Samir ji, Ruchika Arora ji, and Shri Munjal.